This session on video distribution across platforms, broadband, IPTV, cable TV, and mobile. What's a little bit different about this session than others is we'll be focusing a little on infrastructure that enables new business models. And it's going to span, because of the nature of the breadth of our panelists, we're going to be spanning all the way from business to the home network in our discussion. On day 4 of the conference, it's almost kind of a humorous thing by now to say, welcome to day 4 of the Apple iTunes conference. This is a perfect example of how when something is successful in the market, a conference is no longer needed for it, which was a topic brought up in some of the sessions yesterday. How will we know when we don't need this topic anymore, when there's no more conferences about it? So we're actually going to try to move beyond some of the discussions that have come up in the other panels about that particular company and technology, and talk about some of the ad-supported models, some of the subscriber-supported models that are emerging. What are the problems and challenges and opportunities, and how technology might be able to play a role in solving some of these difficult problems. Some of those difficult problems are just the essential issue for a content owner, how do you get your video online available and optimized? And we are going to focus pretty much on video in this session. We're going to give some examples of how content owners are using technology to improve using technology to enable the new business models and improve the consumer experience. And one of the threads that you'll hear running through is also about metadata. At this point, bandwidth is pretty commoditized. Content is becoming commodity. Most service providers have some. Most service providers have some good content, branded content. What's different now, what differentiates, is actually the metadata. The metadata is what differentiates the content. It's a good thing I didn't have more coffee. So what I want to do is start with introductions of the panelists. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves, starting with Doug on my far right, and then come towards me. Just a few, your name and company, of course, and a few words about your background and what you want to bring to this discussion.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Doug Glenn. I'm Chief Marketing Officer of Zetera, a company I doubt any of you have heard of. We're an early-stage company in Irvine that has developed a new approach to IP storage, so low-cost, scalable storage. But for years before that, I was in the games business with Lucasfilm and Sega, and had some pioneering experience distributing video games electronically.
Terrific.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Norman Liang from IBM. I'm a business development executive in our group, newly formed, called Technology Collaboration Solutions. We are the gateway to IBM's experience and IBM's intellectual property to help our clients build the next generation consumer entertainment experience. Across the board, before that, I was a venture capitalist in Silicon Valley, and also had previously founded 2 companies in the online space. And today, what we see is, we're really seeing that, everybody's reaching across the value chain to try to figure out, how do I enable the service and the platform to deliver content to the device? And we're working really hard to integrate that whole experience.
Thank you. Jeff.
Good morning. My name is Jeff Allen. I'm the chairman and founder of AnyStream. We are a software technology provider that actually helps enable the video distribution across multiple devices, platforms, etc. So we primarily work with tier 1 media companies like Disney, CNN, AOL, Warner Brothers, Bertelsmann, Weather Channel, etc. About 400 plus major properties around the world. And my background is in software, originally as a developer. Spent 15, 16 years in the broadcast, post, and film space. So we're out here just trying to unlock all these roadblocks that from getting the content that we all want, that we're willing to pay for, but for some reason we can't seem to get it to where we want it.
And I understand you're also the IT executive of your home
Of our
network.
household, right. My
Yes.
4 TiVos, networked, my Slingbox, I got them all ready to go.
Okay, thank you. And Michael?
Good morning. My name is Mike Gordon. I'm co-founder and chief strategy officer for Limelight Networks. We're an internet content delivery network, so that means we deliver content over the internet for media companies. What I think I can add today is a pretty broad range of inputs as to what our customers, folks like ABC, CBS, Fox, et cetera, what they're doing, what they're thinking, and where they and their financial support as the advertisers sort of see a lot of the trends going.
Thank you. And Vic?
Good morning, I'm Vic Mahadevan. I'm the CEO of NeoEdge Networks. We're really a grid services delivery vehicle that enables content providers to have a continuous connected relationship with their customers, thereby enabling these content providers to transact and sell electronically their digital content at a very affordable price, as well as dramatically bring down the cost of delivery. And my background has primarily been in software and the systems business. And it's interesting here, Doug, because I've spent 10 of my past N number of years in the storage industry.
Terrific. Thank you. And welcome to those folks who've also joined us since we started. I'm going to start out perhaps with Norman, since maybe the broadest view across these sectors and what's going on with video infrastructure could be represented with your company and your experience. Why don't you give us a little insight into, some of the big trend lines in this video build-out, infrastructure build-out across sectors that you see, Norman?
So, the biggest thing that we're seeing across the entire content world is that we're seeing that companies are really struggling to adopt the workflows, the processes, and the mechanisms to distribute content to the devices in the home. We at IBM have been involved in a lot of the infrastructure development on the IPTV front, as well as with the MSOs and as well as with the DSS providers, and trying to link them up and help the studios get their content digital and make it available through the new emerging markets and channels that are available with online distribution, with portable video distribution. Again, the world is waiting to see how Vongo works across platforms. Everybody's trying to figure it out. Starz, of course, is a big partner with the studios to help enable that. The jury's still out on what IFC is doing with their simultaneous release across platforms as video-on-demand content, as well as first-run release content in the movie theaters today. Again, it's about simplifying and unifying the experience. The studio providers are not afraid to make that content available to the consumer. The consumers clearly want that content to be available to them. And again, there's just no link between how you create that content, how you manage that library of assets, and then how you deliver that content to the consumer, and then replicate that experience for them with their personal libraries.
I would say that's a huge point. I mean, what you read about in the papers all the time, and you hear about it, is rights. You can't get the rights. Who's paying for the rights? You can't clear the music track. It takes. But you know what? The reality is that those problems are being solved pretty quickly. Their little secret is, you can walk into a Walmart and buy a pair of jeans, and that electronic transaction goes back. They know what the inventory is. Without anything happening, you can deliver a new pair of Levi's to a Walmart superstore, overnight properly. Yet it can take you 4 to 6 weeks after you've cleared rights to get a movie on your head end. I mean, there's a problem with that. You think about that. So there's a lot of people that are flocking. A lot of our customers are flocking to the internet, not because it's where the revenue is today, but it's where they can control the loop of a release, of a schedule, of a DRM, and they can start to make projections of how that may translate to the offline world. And that's a huge thing. You look at advertising. The reason advertising, beyond the fact that it's the direct advertising on the web is the antithesis of kind of broad-based brand advertising. You also have an immediate feedback loop. You know what's working. You know how quickly it is. You can change it. But there's a long way to go to get what we're calling kind of supply chain automation. Once you've got the rights, great, you own it. If it takes 4 weeks to get it there, and it's going to take you literally 6 months to coordinate a cross-platform launch, day and date release of content on 6 platforms, you better be darn sure it's going to be successful before you try it. And that's what a lot of our customers are struggling with right now. They just can't actually serve the demand in a timely, cost-effective, consistent way. And so that's obviously what we're trying to help them solve. But it's a big issue.
And to Jeff's point, what we're seeing across the board is, we're seeing that people are seeing all the new networks that are evolving as distribution channels, the pipes that are being unified over the framework called the internet and digital content. It's all the same thing to the consumer, whether it's video on your cell phone, whether it's a casual game on your set-top box, whether it's a first-run release in a digital movie theater. It's all, at the end of the day, the same pipe. And the service providers are really struggling with the infrastructure model of trying to figure out, how do I implement the controls that allow me to accomplish my business goals? And how do I find the technology? Again, people are looking to us to really find and identify the technology, not necessarily create the technology, because I think we all agree on this panel that the technology is there. It's about figuring out how to make that technology work easily for the consumer so that they really see that it's an integrated experience that's interactive with their friends when they want it to be, but they can turn off that level of interaction anytime. And the in-home model, the mobile model, the theater model, all that content at the end of the day, it's movies, it's TV, it's video, it's pictures, it's music. That's what it is. The consumer doesn't think of it as digital media. They think of it as content. And at the end of the day, I think we've heard this week that content is king, and the infrastructure to support this growing library of content and allow you to physically distribute that or virtually distribute that across your own personal network doesn't exist. And again, we're now starting to see that the methodologies of search that people are looking at and using to find information on the web are now being applied to your personal library of content. And again, we at IBM have spent a lot of time thinking about the technologies and how you apply them, and thinking about how you make search a simple experience to find the specific content you're looking for based on, it might just be 30 seconds of the 22-minute loop of TV that was Will and Grace yesterday. You're only looking for 30 seconds, but how do you find that right 30 seconds without scanning through it? And again, we think that search and meta
So
tagging.
I want to move the discussion along. What we're saying right now, you guys are saying that the technology's all there. Doug, and I want to kind of throw it to you. You have an interesting point of view on that about the industry of the content owners and their use or disuse of technology.
Sure, the technology is there in a sense. But historically, what we've seen is that every time there's a new wave of enabling technology, it makes things more complicated before it makes them simpler. And it's just like in the early days of computing, it was diabolically complicated to solve a simple mathematics problem, which now everyone knows how to do instinctively. So when I'm on the road, I'll frequently get a call from my wife, irate, asking me, how do I watch a DVD on the damn television? I have to say, well, pick up the remote that says Toshiba and hit input, and then pick up the other remote that says Kenwood and hit such and so. It shouldn't be like that, and it won't be like that forever. And HDMI is going a long way toward making the devices know what to do. But we shouldn't kid ourselves into thinking that any sort of ordinary consumer, 40% of whom still pay their cable bills in person, could walk into this room and have any idea what we're talking about. So we're dealing with an infrastructure that's evolving pretty rapidly, but it's still at the point where this morning's conversation with Jeff, he was saying, well, I've got 4 TiVos in my house because
I've got 4 TVs.
They can't talk to each other.
Right. Exactly.
And I can't buy or rent content and watch it wherever I want to. I have to be an IT director. And as long as this situation's in place, we're going to be dealing with a small subset of all consumers, and we just have to recognize that. And that as we move out to a broader mass of consumers, they're not going to work so hard to get digital content. And it has to be as easy as it was when they learned how to use a television set. I got shown IPTV as a demo, and the guys who developed it said, well, isn't this wonderful? But all was obvious to me was now it took 20 times longer to change channels. And that's what's going to be obvious to consumers.
And that's
So
what
how radical do you think we should go, Doug? How far should the content owners go? I mean, should they just totally embrace technology, open everything up, and see how the market falls? Or are there some specific examples of things that are working?
Yeah, it's just a difficult question for the content owner, to take a risk on a very complex and evolving situation where there's almost no way of telling what's going to happen next. Except what we can see in a few instances. One story that I told you on a call prior to the panel was an experiment that was done by Warner Video in China, where DVDs were priced not at 10 times the price of pirated media, but at twice the price of pirated media, and they found that they're actually getting very good sales. So there are a lot of experiments to be done to determine, where consumers, will see value in being honest and doing things the way the content owners want. And we just won't know until we have those empirical examples.
So the real Gucci bag has some cachet over the pirated one, right? Yeah.
Actually, Catherine, I think there's
Yeah.
a more important point that Doug is making, which is really critical that we not overlook. Content is actually the second king. The consumer, our audience participant, is actually the king. And there's something else important about our consumer that you can't forget. They're very smart. Now, we all have, mothers and fathers that don't carry cell phones, and some of us don't use instant messaging, and very few of us in this room have a MySpace page. But the 15 to 25 demographic, today's 15 to 25 demographic, which is heavily involved, not just in creating content, but in the techniques and technologies of moving content around and making content suit their purposes. 10 years from now, they are the prime media demographic. So we have to keep in mind that our customer, who is the most important thing and is should be the center of our universe, is our partner as well. And what Doug's point about the Time Warner experiment in China is that it demonstrates, even on economic terms, our customers, our audiences will meet us halfway if we make an effort to meet them partway. So we shouldn't get so caught up necessarily in 100% solution. We should make aggressive attempts to meet our audience members part of the way, and I think they'll come a long way towards meeting us the rest of the way.
It's interesting that you bring up, what about MySpace? Anybody in the audience have a page or have family members on MySpace? Yeah. Oh, okay. A lot. Okay, that's next year's conference, the MySpace Digital Hollywood Conference. Vic, that's an interesting segue, I think, about reaching consumers safely. What about your point of view on that? Secure content online.
The customers that we are working with, especially the content providers, and these are movies or gaming providers, are telling us that they want to get their games or movies and videos across to customers however they want it, whenever they want it, but it needs to be private and secure, so there is no question of any rights infringement. And we fundamentally believe the way to do that is through our grid services capability. Clearly, there are other technologies that enable the same thing. But the most important thing is making it really a delightful user experience, because a user on a certain day may watch, games. The next day they're watching, playing games. The next day they're watching action movies, or the third day they just want to watch CNN News. So really targeting and providing that appropriate content at the right time with the right mood for the consumer, who really is the king and the queen, is very, very important for us as infrastructure providers.
Yeah, just to point on that, I think that we haven't really talked about, but complexity just kills in digital media right now. So we can't overestimate the value of making it simple. I mean, the reality is the Warner experience did it. iTunes did it. It's just so much easier to buy a song for $1 now. It's way easier to do that. Or if you want to buy a TV show, it's actually easier to do that than to spend time with Kazaa or BitTorrent or any of these other guys out there. And the reality is, if the technologies are in place to actually enable that across a multitude of devices and consumer habits, the studios are really interested in doing that. It doesn't have to be rock solid secure. Most people just don't steal. The reality is that we're hearing from them, they want credible security. They want it the primary not to oppose the user experience, which it does in virtually every case today. And it lets them buy, so let's keep honest people honest. That's really the key thing. So security is a big issue. It's not the technology, it's more the fact that consumer electronics companies and the network providers and the content providers kind of haven't really agreed as to who gets what percentage of the value right now.
Yeah, which kind of goes to the point of, what we're talking about is really in a pretty embryonic stage. In fact, Vic has also asserted that iTunes can't possibly be making money, making profit.
Yes, we have figured out that if they have hit songs and there are 3-4 million people around the world downloading that song, Apple is really paying for peak bandwidth usage, that in every song they're actually losing money, but they make it up on the hardware sales and subsidizing the actual songs through the hardware sales.
Yeah. So I
Now I'll expect a call from Steve Jobs.
Paul Sagan.
He's being very diplomatic on the tape. Let's just check. We've put some assertions out here. We've got some interesting panelists. Any questions from the audience at this point? Right there, the green sweater.
Can you talk about the advantage and disadvantages of peer-to-peer distribution networks versus the sort of more traditional content delivery networks?
Okay. Does anyone want to take
I'll start with
peer-to-peer
mine, and then clearly I think
advantages?
I'll respond.
Michael can respond.
Okay.
Yeah.
There we go.
Really,
Good one.
every one of these technologies is a clear place in the market, and that's the important thing. We're in the embryonic stages. The reason why the Grid Services Network for us, especially if you're downloading movies and videos, we believe works extremely well versus streaming, is basically you can pre-stage those movies and videos ahead of when the consumer actually wants to see it. So it's like playing at a theater near you tomorrow. We can pre-seed it tonight, and then when you click, it's an instant user experience in the morning or in the evening versus waiting for that download bar to finish. So the point is the speed and ease of use and the timing of the sequencing for that movie or video is so important that can only be achieved through the economics of the Grid Services Network, especially if you're scaling in the millions of users around the world. And clearly Michael has his point of view and has a strong place in the sun as well.
Michael.
Well, I think, first of all, the most important thing to remember is that your audience, our customers' audiences, have 50 years of experience with television, the last 5 with HD, 25 years of experience with CD quality sound, 8 years of experience with second-generation game consoles. And so consumers know what a media experience looks like, what it sounds like, what it feels like. And just because the internet is involved, or the web, either or, is involved in the delivery of that content to the consumer, they're not going to accept a fundamental compromise in that experience. And so when you're making a decision in terms of any critical infrastructure element, whether it's the delivery infrastructure or some other element, you need to keep audience experience front and center. Our point of view on peer-to-peer is that, first and foremost, it's something that constantly gets into the conversation because it appears to have appealing economics. But we've seen very little interest in folks in compromising the user's experience in a trade-off for those economics. But there are a lot of smart people working on it, and perhaps we'll be able to extend the cases where peer-to-peer has worked. It's worked in 2 cases that we know about today. The first is stealing music. I don't think there's anybody in this audience who's interested in leveraging that particular path. The second is in cheap long-distance voice communications. So we have Kazaa and Skype, which, by the way, have one sort of set of technicians behind them, both of them behind them. You have to understand that there's a consumer trade-off, a consumer transaction involved in using those services. In the case of stolen music, it's I get free music. We all know that's wrong, but that's the consumer's trade. In the case of Skype, it's I get low-cost long distance. So the consumer makes a conscious decision to allow his PC to be used for future deliveries in exchange for that trade. If you're charging a customer $5 for a movie, and after he's done watching it, his PC becomes utilized by your peer-to-peer client to then make other deliveries of that movie to other consumers, and that has any impact on his experience, what was the gain he got in that trade? So you have to be very conscious about the consumer's view of these things. Video sharing networks like Vio may have a proposition that's going to work. Vic's company does interesting things in the game space that may well work. I certainly wouldn't tell you that peer-to-peer has no role in the future. But you have to be very cognizant again about how your consumer, how your customer is going to view the various trade-offs involved and the experience that they're going to get when they utilize your content and are exposed to the infrastructure choice that you have made for them.
And just a note that in this panel, we're tending to talk in terms of, video context. So peer-to-peer in terms of video. Norman, you wanted to make a comment?
And again, the enterprise, the content owners who have the workflows in place and make their libraries available, they're afraid of that peer-to-peer model because of the lack of controls in place and the lack of the inability to enforce some basic level apply some basic level of logic to it. Again, what happened to the music industry was rampant widespread distribution, and granted that has some real positive economic benefits. Some bands out there that wouldn't normally have reached a mainstream audience reached a mainstream audience. It's no different than how REM traveled from college town to college town playing gigs. That's how REM got popular. They developed a loyal, viral fan base. But with peer-to-peer content, the lack of controls and the lack of ability to control how many times that content is made available to friends and family is really what keeps the content owners up at night. And it's what forced them to go after and shut down a little technology called Replay TV. How many people are familiar with the fact that Replay TV, a $1,000 box that people paid for the ability to be able to share content with, was shut down because at the end of the day, they couldn't come up with a model that worked with the content owners.
Well, and
I would like to respond to both of you so that,
Can I inject one quick thought for you? A real interesting thought, by the way, is, and Jeff has a Slingbox, I have a Slingbox. How many of you have a Slingbox? So is that retransmission? It's a real interesting question that, like Replay TV, is going to get sorted out by somebody other than this panel. So there's a lot of issues in content now. Over to
No,
you.
I think, the points made are clear if you're an open source play like a BitTorrent, but, when you're a private hosted managed service like ours, the content provider can provide that content only to their consumer base. And what we are seeing from our customers is they're providing loyalty programs to those who want to share that content so that if you are buying the next movie, you're getting it for 50% off. So they're able to do marketing promotions, viral promotions, really targeted advertising so that there's a real value being given to the consumer that says if you're willing to share, and sharing is caring, If they can provide real value that results in them feeling that they're getting a better benefit, that's where it's more important, and that's why the privacy and security and management of a hosted private network is far different than the examples being used of an open, because clearly the content owners want to make sure they know who they touch at any given point in time. And from our customers, they're seeing a continuous, connected relationship, and they specifically know what's going on with those consumers 100% of the time, and they're upfront with them about what's happening. And I think being straightforward and upfront with customers is the most important thing.
There you go. Were there other questions? Blue shirt. I'll come to you. Yeah.
Follow up on the panel mentioned the issue of complexity and multiple TiVos. Cablevision recently announced more of a hosted type of storage architecture for DVR. So the storage model is more consolidated outside of the home. And just wonder if the panel could comment on it, the strength of that, and if they see that's a trend going forward.
Well, I can say
So
we have
there's
a lot of.
commentary there. Just let me repeat in case people didn't hear. Are there comments from the panel on the strength or viability of the hosted models, such as announced recently by Cablevision for consumer content? We did talk about that.
We have a bunch of cable MSO customers as well, and this is not a new idea. Technology's been available to do it for a while. Time Warner did, with the Maestro Group did it, and ultimately shut it down and restarted it as Start Over, which is more of a controlled, rights-cleared version of that with the advertisers. I think, from a consumer standpoint, you know, it's nirvana, right? Because then I don't have to buy 4 TiVos. I don't have to keep track of recording. If I want to watch it downstairs, I don't have to record it in both places. It's always there. I mean, one can argue from a consumer experience it's the right approach, but you know, I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination. But it's, you know, if we believe Slingbox is going to test the fair use ruling, then this one's certainly testing it. It's even significantly more because there is no physical piece of device. It's the atoms and bits that we talked about, right? When the Supreme Court ruled on that, it's because I owned a physical device that I paid for, a Betamaxer, and I owned a physical cassette. But in the Cablevision world, it's purely logical, right? The consumer experience, I haven't seen it. It's not in the territory I live, but I expect it to be quite positive. I can imagine the customers are going to really enjoy it. It's always available.
Thank you, yeah.
I
I'm sorry.
I think customers
Well,
are
I
gonna-
want to go to Doug, though, if that's okay with you.
Sure.
Is that okay with you? Because I know this is something that's fundamental to the business you're working on today, Doug, and you've got a lot of experience having been with Mattel, Sega, Lucas, and I want to hear a little bit from you on that.
Well, there's a fundamental plumbing question that underlies all this discussion. You know, where are people going to put all the digital content that they're accumulating? How are they going to avoid losing it, and how are they going to avoid the headache of managing it? Last year, for the first time, sales of notebook computers passed sales of desktop computers, and one thing we know about notebooks is they've got tiny little hard drives. One thing we know about digital content is that it's getting bigger and bigger, and a third thing we know about consumers is, for whatever reason, they don't throw things away. So, we're going to be running up with our business models against a crisis that doesn't get talked about much, and that is how to store and how to simplify the storage of all of the bits that people are generating in their home, all the digital photography bits and the digital video bits and the MP3s they're downloading, the HDs that they're going to be buying and renting, and God help us if consumers finally start buying movies and television programs instead of renting them. Where in the world are they going to put them? The hosted model makes an enormous amount of sense, at least from an ease of use point of view. It begs the question of all of the consumer-generated storage. So, as Kathy mentioned, I'm in the business of providing sensible, low-cost, scalable, redundant storage plumbing, and that's something that's going to have to get solved. Consumers will never buy enough storage to start with. They're not going to want to manage it. They're certainly not going to have storage area network management sophistication in the home. So it's just it's gotta be as simple as the Tupperware in the attic.
Yeah.
I won't go any further into a commercial for the company.
Hold on. So I know that
Yeah.
we said we'd hear from Michael. Norman has some comments. We have yet another question waiting. So, but Doug, what about, I mean, we have number portability now. What if I store my personal content and I can't bear to delete, family pictures or whatever, and I got a big thing of content with Cablevision? And what if then I have to move to Comcast? What's going to happen with that?
One would hope that there'd be the same kind of cooperation as happens if you're changing banks.
Yeah, so these are some of the things that we've got to start talking and looking to in the future. Michael and Norman, you wanted to comment on this?
I would just quickly observe that although we are at Digital Hollywood, many of the problems that we're talking about are solved by plastic and paper, that is DVDs and printing your photos. And in fact, consumers have a very well demonstrated proclivity to solve their storage problems the old-fashioned way, which has the interesting added benefit of clearing the rights issues as well. I agree with Jeff that there's a real potential rights issues landmine in this centrally hosted, unless you clear all the rights kind of model. But I don't think we should overlook the importance of DVD. Some of us buy some DVDs and rent others, and I think we'll continue to see mixed-use models where consumers who want to own Fargo buy it on DVD, and if they want to see Crash, but just one time because they want to know what the fuss is all about, they rent it. And I think that'll go a long way towards solving a lot of these problems.
Okay, and Norman?
And I think, on that final note, if you look at the Apple iTunes experience, it's about managing playlists, and you can turn on and turn off a playlist anytime you want, and the next time you dock your iPod and sync it up, it actually takes off the songs and then puts in the new songs from the playlist, and it's intelligent enough to figure out, you know, what content needs to reside in that sort of semi-online, really offline experience that's connected to, still connected to your PC. When you look at the experience of television and movies, what we see is that we see that at the end of the day, there shouldn't be multiple versions of content hosted. There should be one version of content made available over the same online plumbing that runs the internet. And we see that, you know, we want to see a world where essentially what you're really storing is the playlist itself. Because once you store that playlist in the preferences, you can then go back and retrieve that content based on the context of whatever I defined it as versus what Jeff might have defined it as or what Mike might have defined it as. That goes into the personal experience. And again, the services and the application, the delivery platform and the infrastructure to support it, they're not here yet. But rest assured, you know, everybody here in Hollywood and everybody up in Silicon Valley, I will bet money that this is something that everybody's thinking about and thinking, how do I recreate this success?
Okay.
But then how do you make the economics work as well as the DVD economics work for a studio now? And for example, would you pay $30 to have the lifetime right to digitally access that content wherever you were? And nobody knows the answer to that, but consumer experience says it's going to be a hard sell.
Okay.
Question.
Another question, if you still have it.
Question. A lot of threads going on, but
Yeah.
Interesting. Great panel.
Thank you.
First, let's start with virtual ownership. I think is absolute ownership, and since it costs pennies to send a movie, I think that you pay the same amount of money for a movie online, only virtually, blurs lines completely. I do think a centralized storage is definitely a route to go. But the question is, get back to the DRM and P2P networks. There's a lot of different methodologies out there. There's a P2P known beyond media, and P2P is, hey, we all know P2P is a great way to save money and store and deliver content. However, the studios are scared to death of it, but they're okay with DRM. And so we know that we get a Windows Media file, and that's DRM, download to our machine, and I can share it with somebody else. But those rights management are like hauled home. So what are the, you know, in this rat's nest called, you know, DRM and P2P and sharing and rights management, what are you guys seeing? You know, Jeff with AnyStream, Doug as a storage solution, Norman at IBM, you know, Vic, you're there talking and fighting that battle. What are you guys all feeling? And especially you, Michael. I mean, you're Limelight.
I'm
you're
the afterthought.
You know, you don't love P2P, but you want to. So my question is, what is all of your feeling toward the studios, and what's their pushback
Or,
on DRM
or,
and P2P networks?
well, or can we make it kind of constructive? I mean, how can you guys help the content? Okay, how can you guys help? What are some of the ways, the examples of, you know, taking some constructive steps here to help the content owners?
Let me start with, you know, I'll give a specific example and let others also talk. You know, what we are seeing and we're working one of the major studios today. What we're seeing from them is that they want to have customers have multiple ways to get that content. It's a DVD potentially as well as digitally. And the reason why they're interested in talking to us is they have this large library of, you know, long tail content, which is stuff that hasn't been accessed in their archives for a long time. And they want to monetize that. And they're not able to do that without our kind of capability because it's just too expensive. It's just a select target market that wants to see that genre of movie. So what they're telling us is as long as the ability for the user to get that movie through our grid network, as well as if they want to get it by DVD as well, make it really simple and a no-brainer, we're willing to go down that path. So we are seeing some early adopters in the movie studio business wanting to jump on that train and letting them access it and try it out. So it's really a great way for them to learn because they really don't know. And so the wrong answer is sit and do nothing. You know?
Okay, and so one approach is the virtual private network for long-form content. What about some of the other ways that we can help the content owners, the studios?
And I would agree that the wrong answer is to do nothing. In fact, I would say that we're spending an enormous amount of time, more than we ever have in the last 18 months. We've been around for 7 years on the West Coast with the studios. And they're surprisingly reasonable. They just want to get the content out there. They want to be everywhere. You're starting to see that. So there's a kind of, as it relates specifically to DRM, that we'll see that there's really 3 issues. The first one is that it just can't be a bad customer experience, right? That's terrible. The only thing worse than that is, is un-QA'd video that looks awful, that screws up their brand, right? So this is it's a serious problem, right? DRM is a complex thing. So and the Sony rootkit thing is still in everybody's mind. So it can't be hard. And Apple did a pretty decent job of that, right? Generally speaking, if you stay on an iPod and only on an iPod, it's pretty decent. The second thing is all about business, and that's the windows, right? I mean, you got the theatrical release, you got the Walmarts of the world, some of the largest DVD sellers that are out there, you got the HBOs and the pay TV services out there. And to be able to syndicate content in a controlled environment across all these different players, right? Whether it's cable VOD or LodgeNet, cable, hotel, or it's a Windows Media Place for sure to buy. It's a very difficult problem to want to put any material revenue source at risk right now, unless there's because the costs are high. I mean, the costs are high, and it's not so much bandwidth bit costs, it's transaction costs. It's a significant problem. And the third point is really on P2P that we're seeing is that it's all about control. P2P is actually, if you think about the audio, BitTorrent, file sharing, stealing, the one great thing about P2P is it is super distribution at its best. It's viral. So the key thing is, how do you find a business model that actually wants that? Harry Potter does not want that. Harry Potter does not want super distribution, right? They want controlled distribution, they want controlled windows. So the areas that are working well, if you can provide that control, and there's Contiki was a company that had some moderate success, it just got acquired. But that's the response that we're seeing. It's business model first, technology second. So.
Okay, thank you.
That's,
Norman, how to...
And the final thing that we see is that, if you look at what's going on in France today, with France's open attack on Apple's proprietary closed DRM platform, again, we're big believers that it's going to be open DRM. And again, DRM has been talked about for about 7 years now. It's almost an issue
including
that Hollywood...
every panel in this conference.
and it's been brought up every single time. But at the end of the day, it's about having some broad set of guidelines that work together and allow the consumer, regardless of what branded device you buy, move that content around. They don't care about codecs and formats and the pipe to the device. What they care about is the content there, and
there's one other thing though, that it's not just the tech. This is actually a point where technology has hurt us, DRM. The reality is, you're pitching a DRM strategy, you're working with a studio, and the question is, well, what do you want to do? Well, what can you do? Everything. Rent one day, buy one day, expires after 7 days. I mean, you ever done Movie Link and Cinema Now? We've done a terrible job training the industry as what to expect. Blockbuster, very simple. You pay up front, you get it. There's a certain fee every song after a period of time, and now you own it if a certain number of days. You know that. The problem is that beyond just the technology and the policy, I've been trained if I own a DVD, I can watch it in the minivan, and when we get home, we can move it inside and play it. There's portability of rights across multiple devices. We expect that. The problem is, it's not just the technology, it's the business models, is what's an acceptable digital distribution or electronic sell-through strategy that people agree to. And iTunes, once again, it's not the panacea, but everyone knows what it is. You buy it once, you own it forever. And you can put it on as many devices that you're not going to use that many devices anyway. Right? So it's not great, but it's doing a good job training the consumer.
And to that point, for the studio owners, it's think about the business rules, then identify the technology that can help you accomplish those rules, and then develop a financial model that helps you build the ROI that ultimately everybody needs to be accountable to their shareholders. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, it's those 3 things that will equal success in the marketplace.
What about some of the advice we can give content owners and do give our customers on things that are big enablers that are not technology, such as metadata? I mean, Jeff, we talked earlier in our brainstorming for this panel about new ad-supported content models and new consumption patterns and how essential, the metadata processes are to them.
Yeah, it's a big issue. If you look at, once again, the two extremes, broadcast advertising, which is incredible for broad-based brand advertising, very easy to buy, reaches lots of big audience. And you look at Google, easy to buy, massive audience, but totally different spectrum. It's highly focused. And it's all about the metadata. And what's the metadata? It's the search. I'm specifically telling you what I'm looking for. That's incredibly valuable. Well, the problem with video or audio is that data doesn't exist broadly. Now, here's the real problem. The problem is it actually does exist. It exists in scripts and pre-production and pan and scan lists and DVDs and EDL, all the stuff you may not even know what I'm talking about, but all the stuff exists upstream with the producers, closed captioning with the pre-production. The problem is that I go back to my Walmart analogy, the Levi's jeans. There really is no, and it's and the studios are driving this heavy. I can't say which one's first, but they're making major investments right now. There is no electronic supply chain manufacturing process that ties together rights with all the shot lists, with all the information about the scenes, with all the stuff that's in chapters, because the metadata exists. It's just in 14 different people's minds over a 12-week production period, and it gets sent in a can on a digibeta, and it shows up on Discovery 8 months later. So it's a real issue. And so we're really, obviously, we're one of, not
in the center of that.
Yeah, we're in the center of that. And the goal is to try to get this stuff together and bubble it together. And people like Scripps, Home and Garden, they're really aggressive. Why? Their content's evergreen. You know, how to use a miter saw, how to fertilize your yard. This is primo advertising content, right? If I'm watching how to fertilize my yard, give me a Lowe's, give me a Home Depot, give me a turf builder. This makes total, it's Google, right? I'm watching how to fertilize. I don't care about a Ford car at the moment, right? So these are the types of things. And it seems common sense, but you'd be surprised at how difficult these production workflows are, how mired they are in stovepipe, you know, wheelie chair, roll down, different box.
Okay, so what we're saying is that the studios and the content owners have finally gotten
get it. Oh,
they've
they get
gotten
it.
this point
It's just
thoroughly
a tough problem. Yeah.
over the last advanced from the last year and a half or so. They're focusing on it. There's processes and advice and solutions that we can provide. What about on the consumer side? I think, Norman, you saw an example this morning of a meta-tagging, solution for going back to the, home content, personal content. What was
You look at the adoption of personal content, and again, coming from the photo world, photos were first. Everybody was first to adopt the digital camera. Everybody was first to snap pictures. That was the first library that really grew out of control. I can't tell you how many photos I don't look at today. Even though I know they're there, I can't find them. And the fact of the matter is, sometimes on my Mac, if my iPhoto doesn't find that content, I'm freaking out. As a consumer, I don't want to see that the application lost my content. It's supposed to be safe and secure and in a place where I can find it. And again, search is the way to enable that. And again, visual search, being able to look at, having a PC be able to look at the object in that and then group them together into some broad category, and then for you to then narrow down those categories and apply subtext to it, that all goes into finding, at the end of the day, search should find the exact one thing that you're looking for based on what it means to you.
What about the tools?
Tools are just coming up. Again, you look at, how many people use Blinks and Mevi to find content. It's not that broad adoption. Everybody's looking at the business model. There's a lot of business models that are looking at providing that technology to Hollywood. Even if you go and ask Google, Google will tell you that their search experience for video is not where they want it to be. And again, I don't want to find, I don't want to do a search for Ron Howard and then all of a sudden come up with a video of the Fonz. But today, if you go through and you actually click through the 4 or 5 different pages that Google will generate for you based on some broad search terms, it doesn't get you what you want at the end. And again, they're betting that within the first page, they're going to find exactly what you want. But the fact of the matter is, if you go, the deeper down you go, the more likely you are to get confused and say, why is that relevant to what my search terms were?
Okay, so I'm thinking of maybe going back to the device side for a minute, but first I wanted to check for questions from the audience, see if we have any questions. Oh, we do. let's give somebody else a chance. Is that okay with you? Okay, back there.
A quick one, in regards to customers or content owners, it seems that you guys are describing studios as content owners versus the production company that licenses the studio with the content ownership for a moment. If I'm looking at super distribution such as when music first came into the internet, it was an independent band, there were small guys, out of Iuma, that took audio files and made them massively available. That changed the universe in a moment. When you talk about video, it's more complicated because there's a script, there's the actors, whether union or not, and it really make this process really, really complicated. And Vic, if I may speak for a moment, you talked about the studios want to take films and they want to get it out there. My experience is a little different. I came out of CDI back in '87, going into, and we found the studios. The issue was not so much as digitizing whatever the digitized was at that moment. It was really about these rights, these movies we have. The guys who we signed contracts for are dead, but their heirs are still here, and we don't really have rights to make these things available on new media platforms. So it was a question of today they can release anything because of new movies. They figured it out 10 years ago, but old stuff in their library is a question of they just didn't have the rights to make those things affordable to the audience that is perceivably there. I pull this all together and say, how do you, first, are you going to limit your services and solutions to a handful of studios that exist today? Or will your solutions and authoring tools and infrastructure embrace a variety of independent content owners who will truly be the new brands in the marketplace?
Good question. After the statement and the background, thank you. So question about looking forward, there are the well-established studios, and then there are perhaps non-traditional studios that will emerge, and how will we serve them? What do we think about
I'll make a
that?
couple of quick comments. That's a tremendous question and a great point to bring up. At Limelight, we have most of the major media companies as customers, but we have 500 customers. And I think the internet in particular changes everything. The major owners of content are still very important because they're the ones that control the content that has purportedly mass appeal. And it's the need for mass appeal because of the dollar investments that are made that have turned the major content companies into sort of gatekeepers of genius, into this notion that genius is rare and we're going to sort of make the first judgment as to who's got something interesting to say. But what's interesting about the internet, the text era of the internet, is you never heard anybody say 3 billion pages and nothing to read. And that's because the internet does this incredible job of matching me to what I want. And a content or a owner or a voice or someone who's got a story to tell, to that size audience, whatever it is, 5, 50, or 10,000, or 10 million that want to hear it. And so what the, or hear the story. So what the internet is going to do is break down the artificial barriers, whether they're technical, spectrum and cable and local broadcast infrastructure, whether they're business model. If I'm going to invest $50 million, I got to have a mass appeal kind of proposition. And they're going to enable all of the folks that have the existing production processes, skills, assets, and experience once they hurdle over the rights clearance issues as they go. And they should be doing it today as they produce content. It's going to enable you to tell those stories. As a consumer, one last sentence, as a consumer, this is a very exciting proposition to me, and it's what makes the value of all the content assets go up so much, because now it's going to be 57 channels and 57 things I want to see, because they're my 57 channels, if you sort of follow that.
Okay, so to Doug?
Yes, but if we're selling a film that was produced in the 50s, on the internet, it's a heck of a lot easier and probably more profitable to the studio to direct market a DVD than to pay the lawyers to try to sort through all the rights issues, which could probably end up running up bigger legal bills than the total potential for selling that content electronically. And that's a legacy issue that was created inadvertently by the industry that there probably isn't a clean solution to.
And Vic, I know you.
Yeah,
may
I want to make a
respond.
point. It's not just the, we see a tremendous grassroots movement for videos. Look at the success of YouTube. Launched in October, 3 million viewers in December. If you look at what a major national pastime is, blogging, well, we think it's going to move to video blogging. So everybody becomes a little production house in his or her own right, and all that content, like Michael was saying, was going to get served over the web through these different distribution mechanisms. So really there's a democratization a grassroots movement that's going to occur from a grounds up on this whole video movement, in our opinion, in
And
the next
also,
couple of years.
you know, on that final point, you know, to the last thing that we were saying, you know, the tools that will be made available will really help you optimize the workflow without having to add additional steps to the process. Again, the studios have to index that library and then figure out a way how that index is tied into the distribution channels, and then figure out the tools that then the consumer applies to add their layers of subtext to find exactly what they want. And so again, now we talk about integrating the enterprise and bringing them closer to the consumer. And that's what the fundamental change is that's happening today from our point of view.
Yeah, and I want to actually respond to the question on behalf of Sun Microsystems. We definitely see some very important emerging studios. For example, Major League Baseball started out as a website, and they're becoming a broadcaster, you know, as well as the largest online ticket seller in the world. You know, 3-4 years into, you know, hosting the websites for 30 leagues, they just built their own first studios, and they will continue to transform in that direction. Conversely, HBO, who's a customer, and everybody knows their businesses, is probably looking at becoming a much bigger web presence than they started out from. So they're coming in the other direction. It seems like some of these new projects are sometimes greenfields, as we like to say, and those are terrific opportunities, you know, because then the very latest technology, the most efficient and effective processes, the greatest automation, and so on can be employed. And so I think some of the new studios that will emerge are actually going to give the traditional content owners run for their money, so to speak. You know, so just.
And can you imagine if Major League Baseball had to pay residuals to the players in the '88 World Series, you know, or to the person who sang the Star Spangled Banner?
But you know, also, you know, and to that point, you know, people think about TV Guide as just a programming guide, but again, today, TV Guide produces content that's available through different broadcast channels. They've got TV Guide spots that are dynamically inserted into linear programming on broadcast television. They've got programming that is ingested in micro chunks to go on top of their programming guide, so when you turn to the TV Guide channel, it's automatically there. That same content is actually available online through tvguide.com, and you can find those micro chunks of, you know, 5-minute spots of what happened at the Emmys, what happened at the Grammys. All of that content is being made available through one system, one solution that can be applied across multiple platforms.
Okay, so I'd like to kind of shift into one of the other topics that we thought about in preparing this panel. You know, video is the focus. Content is video. Ads are video. We're talking about some pretty sophisticated applications here. What about all these target devices? Are these devices going to have the capacity, capability, horsepower? Which ones are not going to have it or don't have it now to support these models?
The analog cable household, which is still, by the way, I think at this point 40% of cable subscribers are still.
I think it's more.
You know, we tend to think that we live in an all-digital world, but you know, the fact of the matter is there's a big base of the consumer population that is still on analog cable. So the lack of a back channel, the lack of the interactivity, again, that can be applied across the DirecTV and satellite providers, the lack of that back channel. And in the IPTV framework, the lack of that back channel to support targeted advertising and allow you to dynamically sell spots in the marked places in today's.
It's a real issue. I mean, you know, if you want to, you know, obviously nothing new, major, great idea here. If you want to see what works with online advertising, you look at paid search. You know, you look at how that works today. And what does it provide? It provides highly targeted advertisements that get immediately executed with an open market and measurement methodology. And that is, you know, that's what people are looking for from broadband or disconnected video advertising on the web. So if you break that down, what do you need? You need content that is properly tagged, or at least described, because you don't want an irrelevant, annoying, irritating ad to come up in the middle of something. If you want that, you can go to other channels to get that, right? But on your iPod, if you're going to get an ad-supported piece of content on your Windows Media Player for Sure device, you want it to be relevant. And I think this is a big issue, because the reality is that I spend a fair amount of money on content. I'm not crazy about spending more on it. I mean, I actually don't mind advertising. It should be a service to me. It shouldn't annoy me and irritate me. So the reality is it's easy to do that with text. It's hard to do that with video today because the video isn't well described, and the cost of producing video is infinitely more, or substantially more, than it is producing text. So until that problem is solved, and obviously we're working on that quite a bit, ads are content too. And video ads, for them to execute in a market where, make the obvious example, you want to promote a movie, or you want to promote a new chicken sandwich in southwestern United States. Very easy how to do that with McDonald's or with Wendy's on on broadcast television. Very, very hard to do that today, to say no matter what device the customer's on, wherever they are, I'm going to get that, and then I'm going to get a measurement device back on that. I'm going to roll that up. Yet you can do that with keyword search today. So that's what the world has to look like. I mean, that's our opinion of it, and we're working quite a bit on that issue.
And another dimension that I think is interesting and is a great opportunity is as a lot more of the advertising inventory or bandwidth or space, whatever you want to call it, moves into nonlinear kinds of delivery vectors, it really changes the limitations that linear television has placed on advertising, sort of the 30, 60-second framework. And so I think you're going to see a huge increase in the ability of advertisers to take the amount of time that they need to tell their story, make their persuasive point, connect with their intended audience. You're going to see them be able to really innovate in terms of the storytelling part of advertising. And I think that's going to increase, or really, again, dramatically improve the overall content experience. As I said before, I think our audiences are our partners in this. I agree with Jeff. I like ad-supported content. I just don't like irrelevant ads, and I don't like boring ads. But we've all been at these shows where somebody's shown a reel. Usually it's a bunch of European and Australian ads, and we're like, how come we don't see those on our television? And that reel tells us that there is an opportunity here to dramatically improve the perception that our audiences have of advertising. And I think using the internet and the web and devices and nonlinear content models really dramatically unlocks that potential, and it's going to be a very interesting development.
What about there was a recent announcement not too long ago from Comcast using ad insertion in VOD, probably one of the first, if not the first
nationwide
commercial.
Rollout. Right.
Yeah.
It's a big step. I mean, it's a big step. It's, once you get past, you have an audience, multi-billion streams served last year on VOD, but it's a good first step, but you got to make it easy to buy right now, and that's
so to click all the way through and
right. I mean, you can put a
to
lot of money to
download or click to rent or click to sell.
Well, I'm just saying you got to make it easy for the advertisers to buy, is what I'm saying. You have
to,
to.
Across
it's easy
channel.
to put a lot of money to work in broadcast. It's easy to put a lot of money to work in keyword and banner. It's infinitely difficult to do that in video on demand right now. I mean, so that's a big first step to create a market. It's Comcast Spotlight. It's just at least their head ends, but the ability to actually execute a buy in a campaign and get it to work across multiple DMAs with targeted and zip code targeting, so that you're going to get ads that are, oh my God, actually relevant. Nobody, I mean, this is my last comment on this. Everybody hates to be sold, but man, we love to buy. There's a huge difference. The same side, different side of the same coin. So when I'm looking for something and you hit me with an ad, woohoo, that's what it is, great. I don't have to waste my time. I'm going to buy it. That's a great experience, right? And that's by and large what the web has done.
People like those in this room on both sides, in front of and behind the panel, are a lot of us in very busy roles. We're traveling a lot, and I know for myself, I mean, I'm actually irritated that I have to carve out part of my weekend to shop for stuff that I need.
That you want, right?
I don't like taking the time for it, but I need this stuff. Specific things, like for my kitchen remodel,
Right.
or my
and
garden.
you may even want to help on how to do it. It's a service
Absolutely.
to you, right?
Yes,
and what
yes.
tools you might need, right? That's a sales opportunity.
It is.
So.
Doug
So,
and Vic's coming too.
So we've talked about the great experience for the consumer. Talk about the great experience for the advertiser.
Okay.
What advertisers
Fair
would love to be able to do is to spend money knowing that money is going to generate a return based on additional sales, additional use of their services. And there are technologies that are coming available now. There's a company called IMMI, International Media Measurement, Inc., that has outfitted panelists with specially equipped cell phones that sniff out the electronic ads that they're consuming and then track behavior. So for example, a movie studio would be able to track the exposure of consumers to trailers and then know which trailers drove those consumers in to actually watch the movie. Fast food marketers would be able to track what demographics consume their advertising, whether it was at home, at a sports bar, at a friend's house, on the run somewhere, and then would know they actually went into the store. They wouldn't know what they bought. But these sort of tools are going to empower advertisers in an age where traditional advertising measurement techniques are almost completely useless. The diary panels have become almost completely useless because behaviors have changed with people watching multiple sources of advertising and clicking through much too rapidly to ever record them.
Okay, so Vic, I know you've
just
been
one-
patient on
No,
some comments
sure.
that you have.
One point I'd like to make, we've been talking about the technology and devices. I really think there's going to be a tremendous unleashing of creativity on the part of the ad agencies working with their clients in targeting, either 4-second ads or 10-second ads, really targeted towards different media, different devices. So that's micro-channel to the consumer, depending on the target market they're going to serve. So it's really a very exciting time across the entire ecosystem of the industry. It's not just the technology providers or the content owners, but I think the advertising agencies are going to have to unleash their creativity to really get that point across for all of us who suffer from some form of ADD or the other.
and again, for the service providers already own all the information about the consumer. Again, you look at what Yahoo, Google, and AOL do. They're able to target ads based on information that they're collecting every day when you use their clients. They already know what you surf. They already have a general idea of what your preferences are. They know where you go. They know what you're doing behind the scenes. Again, they've come up with toolbars to help you be logged in all the time, and they're really monitoring your activity. When you're watching TV, that framework, that advertising framework has not been linked up yet. And again, in the banner world, there are 30 different versions of a banner. So you may see one version, but there's probably going to be 25 other banners that'll pop up to each person in this room for it marketing exactly the same thing. Again, that level of customization, that's what's going to come up. But again, the tools to create that content quickly and efficiently don't exist yet, and the back channel to report how effective that advertising is doesn't exist yet. And oh, by the way, local advertising is, today a $5 billion cottage industry that really helps support the cable industry.
So this kind of gives you a picture of the panel topic that we want to put together for next season, perhaps. Yeah, I know, it's 10 minutes to the end, thank you. And let's open it up, see if there are additional questions for the audience, from the audience, like, can I get a blanket? Yeah. Way in the back. How do you really... Okay, the DRM session is next door, but it's okay. We have to consider this topic related to video. Okay, so how do you really rights protect any of this stuff? Okay, let's stop there, because we only want to have 1 or 2 or 3 questions. Okay. Would a panelist like to comment on this topic?
It's a broad question.
Well,
How would you
one quick-
rephrase it then?
One quick observation I'd make is that obviously rights protection is really important when you're going to monetize your content through things like pay-per-view, subscription services, et cetera. There's an awful lot of content, and there's going to be a huge amount of it in a very short period of time here, where the whole point is just to get the story told as broadly as I possibly can. I have a voice. I want to be heard. I don't care how many places it goes. In fact, if 1 billion Chinese people listen to it, that's even better. So I think you know, there's going to be a lot of models, and they're not all just going to be personal publishing models. I think you're going to see advertisers telling their stories in ways where they hope it gets ripped off and passed around and shared. So I think it's an important issue in certain big sectors of the industry, but I don't think it necessarily, in terms of the overall opportunity that we're all looking at, to sort of change a lot of the ways that we experience content. I don't think it's necessarily the definitive question that's going to drive the future.
And then Doug and I actually talked about, I had seen O'Reilly, is it Michael? Michael O'Reilly on a panel. I see your question in a minute. And, you know, just to give some context, he's got a radical view that everything should just be opened up and let the market develop, you know, in terms of how it's monetized. So rather than having the big influence, rather than having the big emphasis on keeping content away from the bad guys, the emphasis would be on getting content to everybody who should have it. Yeah, so interesting contextual point. Back here on this, right there. Yes.
So in a historic advertising world that was not measurable like direct marketing in the broadcast world, you never really knew what caused the sale. Was it the print ad? Was it the newspaper insert? Was it the TV ad? What, you know, there are all these influences. Now we've got opportunities in the internet world and with cell phones to have a lot of measurability. And one of the comments was, hey, basically, you know, we can see what ad performs. However, to Vic's point, there'll be a lot of creative approaches for advertising. My question is as a broadcaster, as a media entity, as a network, your job is to get the offer to the consumer. To Norman's point, 30 ads, who's to say that any of those 30 ads are even a good offer? Your product just might be something the market doesn't necessarily want. There's a psychological disconnect between the ability to target and measure and the ability to sell. What's your opinion on that? As you know, because as a media entity, someone might say, hey, you know, I put an ad on your network and it's no good. But really,
Okay.
the offer, the actual creative, wasn't as appealing as it could have been.
Again,
Just some opinions on that.
I guess I'll let I guess before the marketing guy says something, I'll say that, you know, when I was running a company, you know, what I always said was that 50% of my marketing budget was wasted. And the problem was I didn't know which 50% it was. And now I have a way to solve that. I have a way to track that and measure which 50% it actually might be.
Yeah, and I guess the other answer is it doesn't matter if the advertising's not working, whether it's an unappealing product or an unappealing ad. What matters is that once it's measurable, you unleash lots of creativity. Because advertisers and their agencies have been terrified of taking big creative risks precisely because they wouldn't know whether they'd work or not. Now you could take big creative risks because you can immediately get a linkage back to consumer behavior. So I'd posit that it's the best thing that can happen to advertising, to have a way of instantly getting feedback loops.
Well, in advertising, we don't want to paint it with too broad of a brush. There is still and will be for a very long time a great market for brand advertising. I mean, brand advertising to make you feel a certain way about a product. That's not what the web today is good at all. What the web is good at today is solving transactional, informational, lean forward type of of mining sales and advertising opportunities. Phenomenal job of that. That's not what broadcast is good at today. So there's kind of a bifurcation between that. It just used to be there was only one way to do it. But now that there's another new way to do it, the brand advertising that still works so well, it's going to stay there. It's absolutely going to stay there. To the degree that it can become more measurable, lets you tweak creative, lets you change releases, but it's not going to go away. It's just for the video on the web, advertising that's more how-to, do-it-yourself, improvement, that is innately transaction-driven, like most keyword search. There's a huge opportunity to take the lessons in creative and broadcast and bring it to that new world.
And the other,
I'm sorry, I think building on what Jeff said, it's important to remember too that, I'm not a transaction, I'm a life. And I think most advertisers, certainly most major brands get that. And they're interested in having a relationship with me over a long period of time.
Absolutely.
And they're interested in persuading me about the merits of their product over a long period of time. And so there's absolutely going to be, Google has everybody's attention because of its market capitalization, and there's no question, I think Jeff has made some great comments on this, that the linkage of cause and effect in the Google world is really powerful, but it's not definitive of all of, there's a lot of things I buy without searching first. There's a lot of things
Absolutely.
I buy months after I see the ad or ads or whatever. So, but when you unleash the creativity and the storytelling prowess of advertisers and brand marketers and allow them to really reach me the way I can be reached and reach Jeff in a different way, since
And
this
measure
crazy person has 4 TiVos, then I think you really begin to improve the efficacy of advertising. That increases its value. That makes your opportunity to deliver some of it much more valuable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So actually, on that note, we've hit the end of our session. And I want to thank our audience who came out early on day 4.